All right, review for Crimson Tide, starring Gene Hackman, obviously, and Denzel Washington. So the movie came out in 1995, and the plot: on a U.S. nuclear missile sub, a young first officer stages a mutiny to prevent his trigger-happy captain from launching his missiles before confirming his orders to do so. So I've always loved this movie. I think it's incredibly intense, and it's like two, titans of acting just going after each other, and it's great to watch. Um, and of course, you have Tony Scott, who's a titan of directing. So really, it's all just coming together in this claustrophobic environment where everyone's like sweating like crazy. It's almost like, do they have air conditioning? I don't know. Maybe they have to turn it off because they have to like run silent or something. I don't know. But there's just such great scenes, especially any scene that Denzel or Gene Hackman is on screen is amazing. Like, I love the scene when they're both when they get the launch order, and then but the confirmation is cut off, and then they're in the same shot together and they're arguing, and then Gene Hackman starts cussing them out and saying, well, if you don't confirm the order, then I'll find someone who will. And then Denzel's just like, oh no, you will not. It's just such a great movie, and they kind of build their animosity toward each other, because I think like Denzel's like this highly educated guy who like went to Harvard and everything, and I think Gene Hackman is a little more old school. He just worked his way up through the Navy. But it's such a watchable, enjoyable movie that, and it's Jerry Bruckheimer. I think it's Hans Zimmer that does the music. Yeah. Great cinematography by Darius Wolski. Okay. He did The Martian. Oh, okay, so he's doing a bunch of Ridley Scott stuff now. Napoleon, Alien Covenant, The Martian, even though I hate Alien Covenant, but it looks pretty good. Dark City, The Fan. So yeah, this guy knows what he's doing. Just has a great claustrophobic feel to the movie, and like I said, everyone's like sweating, and it's just intense. I just love the intensity of this movie. Almost every second of it is incredibly intense. But there's good character work too, because like I said, they explain their backgrounds. Like they show that Denzel has a wife and kids, and that you really feel the weight on their shoulders of what's going on. And the thing I like about it too is, I mean, the synopsis I think isn't really fair, because Gene Hackman's trigger happy. Okay, but what if he's right? Because that's the whole thing. So that's why I like it. They just don't make Gene Hackman into some crazy Bond villain who just wants to nuke the world. Like, he's a little more trigger happy maybe than Denzel, but he's also been there for 20-30 years. So, because they get the order, because there's like Russian rebels, and they take over a nuclear base and a nuclear submarine, and they're gonna launch nukes. So then we're gonna launch nukes. They get the order to launch them, but then you need a second order that confirms it, and that gets cut off. The radio gets destroyed. So throughout the movie, they're rebuilding the radio, and then this creates the conflict between Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington. And then Gene Hackman kind of breaks the letter of the law and says, I'll find someone who will repeat the order, and that's not the way you're supposed to do it. And then that causes some of the crew to turn on Gene Hackman, so they lock him away. And then Gene Hackman's able to find members of the crew that get him out, and then they get guns, and then they lock Denzel away. And then throughout the movie, they're fixing the radio. And then Denzel's able to get out, and then he gets guns, and then he is basically at a stalemate with Gene Hackman, and he's like, okay, because the radio's about to be fixed. He's like, well, you have 3 minutes. And in the end, it's, shown that there is no nuclear war, that the rebels were put down, and the world isn't destroyed. So, just a great thriller that, like I said, they just don't make these anymore. I mean, maybe it's the actors just aren't as good as they used to be. I'm not sure. Tony Scott's no longer with us, unfortunately. But you just have such a good cast, too. You got Denzel Washington, Gene Hackman, Viggo Mortensen, the King, James Gandolfini, just Steve Zahn. You got Steve Zahn in there. Just great acting, intensity, even some good humor, like when they're talking about those horses, and that he says they're from Portugal, and then he says they're from Spain, and then in the end, Gene Hackman's like, you were right, and then he's like, they were from Spain. So like he's not admitting he was right about the whole situation, but it's a nice little moment at the end of the movie, because he admits he was wrong, and he puts in for early retirement and recommends that Denzel Washington get his own ship. And so he's not bitter about it, really. He's just like, yeah, you were right, I was wrong, but I could have been right. And that's the truth. But yeah, just rewatching this, man, Gene Hackman was such a good actor, just one of a kind actor, and it's just great to see him go against other really good actors too. And James Gandolfini, he's not around anymore. He died way too young, which is a travesty. But yeah, and Tony Scott's not around anymore. So, but yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, I would definitely recommend it. Even though I just kind of spoiled the ending, but I think you kind of think they're not going to destroy the whole world, so But yeah, the U.S. Navy refused to work with them. It says the U.S. Navy would not cooperate with the filming. For several scenes, the French Navy allowed the use of one of their Triumphant-class ballistic missile submarines along with the aircraft carrier Fok. The refusal of an executive officer to agree in launching nuclear weapons due to a fragmented order is based on a similar incident within the Soviet Navy. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet submarine B-59 attempted to infiltrate the U.S. naval blockade by running submerged. By doing so, they had been out of contact for several days with Moscow at the depth they ran at. When the U.S. destroyers dropped signal depth charges to force the submarine to surface, the Soviet captain believed war had broken out between the U.S. and the Soviet Navy. His sentiments were concurred by the onboard political officer. However, Savitsky's second-in-command, Vasily, who also was the flotilla commander, refused. All three needed to agree before launching. Being out of contact for so long with no clear orders Akhronov convinced Captain Savinsky to surface, and they found themselves surrounded by U.S. destroyers. The communication was reestablished in Moscow, and they received orders to return home, thereby preventing nuclear war. Well, that's a good thing. It's always a good thing to prevent nuclear war, I say. An old saying. Denzel Washington took this role so he would have an opportunity to be in there jousting with a master. Yeah, Gene Hackman. And that's really what it is. It's almost like they're like jousting. Like it's almost like you could have them have swords, you know? And maybe he means with the master also, because with Tony Scott as well. The scene in which the USS Alabama is diving for the first time is footage of the real submarine submerging. Tony Scott was following along with a helicopter and a separate camera unit on boats, obtaining shots of the ship. When the captain of Alabama requested that the helicopter cease filming, they submerged, which is what director Scott was hoping for anyways. The U.S. Navy found the subject of the film objectionable and inaccurate and refused to provide any assistance in the movie's making. Tony Scott obtained footage of the real USS Alabama departing Pearl Harbor through possibly illegal means. A paid civilian informant tipped off Scott to the day and time of Alabama's sortie from port, in obvious violation of Navy ship movement regulations. Scott then had camera boats and a helicopter on standby to film the surface sub. Reportedly, the Alabama's captain requested assistance to remove the film crew, but then simply decided to submerge the sub prematurely. Footage Scott was hoping to obtain anyways. Although the Navy issued a formal protest about using its equipment in the film without permission, it was not illegal, as the sub was in public view and they could do nothing to prevent it. Interestingly, Scott was hoping only to obtain footage of an Ohio-class sub in motion on the surface. The fact that the boat was the actual Alabama was sheer coincidence. The last 60 minutes of the movie is almost in real time. 60 minutes to launch, 60 minutes to the end of the credits. Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer originally offered Val Kilmer one of the headlining roles, but he declined. Years later, Kilmer noted it was one of the few films that he wished he had agreed to be in. The role offered to Kilmer by Simpson and Bruckheimer was never formally specified. I wonder if it's Viggo Mortensen's role. And he's great too, because he has the codes for the actual launch device, and only he has them. And that's a really intense scene too, when he won't open them. And then Gene Hackman goes kind of crazy, puts a gun to his head, and he's like, well, what's the point of killing you? You're the only one who knows the codes. So then he puts the gun to some other like a guy next to him head. Just intense stuff. The Alabama's bridge was built on a huge hydraulic gimbal. The gimbal tilted the set to simulate the submarine's dive angles. Also, this was the same gimbal used in the movie Hunt for Red October a few years later. That's also a good movie. I'd say this is better, though. But that's a good one. The time the elapses between when Ramsey says to Hunter, you have 3 minutes, and the successful reception of the EAM is 2 minutes and 38 seconds. Robert Towne received an urgent call from Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer one night regarding a key scene between Denzel and Hackman. They wanted Towne to rewrite the discussion on the nature of war between the two characters, thus setting up a more plausible potential for conflict for the remainder of the film. Such was the urgency of the situation that Towne had to dictate his rewrite over the phone to Simpson and Bruckheimer. The USS Alabama is a real Ohio-class nuclear sub commissioned in 1985 and is still in service as of 2018. USN Captain Skip Beard. Is that a real name? That's like such a naval name. Skip Beard, who commanded the Alabama on 5 patrols from 1986 to 89, served as a technical advisor on the film. He also makes a silent cameo as the bald-headed Board of Inquiry member seated to the right of Jason Robards during the finding of facts scene at the end of the film. Notable Quentin Tarantino script contributions included Hunter calling himself Captain Kirk. Yeah, I thought maybe that, because I heard that Tarantino ghostwrote some of the script. Dialogue about submarine films and the enemy below. Silent runs deep, and Hunter concerning Rivetti about his argument with Benfield over whether Jack Kirby or Jean Mobius Gerard was the better artist to draw the Silver Surfer. Yeah, I thought that was some Tarantino. Because Tarantino is, he big fan of Tony Scott. He was personal friends with him. Tony Scott directed True Romance, obviously. Okay, the film was inspired by the events of the Soviet submarine B-59 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Quentin Tarantino was brought in to do uncredited punch-ups of the dialogue. His major contribution was the comic book bickering. The character's name, Russell Vossler, is a reference to Rand Vossler, with whom Tarantino used to work in a video store. Also see Pulp Fiction. Denzel Washington had been doing a lot of boxing before the movie. It was his idea to add the boxing montage. The set used for the bridge of the USS Alabama was also used in the USS Georgia's bridge in Independence Day. Oh, wow. Quentin Tarantino was reluctant to doctor the script because it was not his own project or idea, but Tony Scott, who had been friends with since he directed True Romance, directed the Tarantino penned True Romance, persuaded him. Tarantino and Scott tried to have him come on board later projects in a similar capacity, but he felt it would distract from his own writing process. So he kind of did it as like a one-time favor to him. Tommy Lee Jones passed on the part of Captain Ramsey's Gene Hackman's part. Wow. Well, I'm glad it's Hackman. I mean, I like Tommy Lee Jones, but I think this is perfect for Gene Hackman. Wow, Al Pacino was offered the role of Captain Ramsey. Yeah, I think Hackman's way better for this role. Warren Beatty was also interested in the movie, and Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer went through a long period trying to convince him to sign on before all the parties moved on. Yeah, I'm glad it's... I don't know, just like Al Pacino in that role. Like, whoa! We're gonna have a nuclear war! Jason Robards, who plays the Admiral in the inquiry scene, served in the U.S. Navy during World War II and received the Navy Cross. Okay. Yeah, and Gene Hackman was a Marine, so... While researching the film for 1993, Tony Scott gained permission from the Navy for himself and several studio executives to board the Ohio-class USS Florida for a brief cruise. They were allowed to interview senior officers and film in the control room during mock missile launch drills, as well as film the interactions of the bridge crew during routine shipyard maneuvers. Washington studied the tapes of these events. Brad Pitt expressed sincere interest in playing LCDR Hunter during the period when Al Pacino was offered and considered the role of Captain Ramsey. Pitt had long wanted to work opposite of Pacino, who he considered a master actor. However, once it was clear that Pacino would not take the role, Pitt also withdrew his interest. He finally got to act with Pacino in Ocean's 13 and shared a scene with him in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Right. There is another USS Alabama, a World War II battleship permanently docked at Mobile Bay, Alabama, that serves as a museum, which has also been occasionally used as a hurricane shelter, most recently during Hurricane Katrina, in which members of 18 museum employees and families took shelter during the storm. After the success of Top Gun, filmed with the full cooperation of the USN, United States Navy, Tony Scott dismissed warnings that such cooperation would not be granted for Crimson Tide, given the film surrounds a mutiny. Right, not a flattering image for the Navy. Scott believed that he had an in with the Navy based on the previous production relationship. However, neither SecNav or the CNO would budge, unlike the Kane Mutiny 1954, in which the Navy also withheld participation but eventually yielded to compromises. The Navy expressed grave reservations about participating in a film depicting not only a mutiny, but one that could result in nuclear war. Michael Schiffer wrote the part for Captain Radji specifically with Gene Hackman in mind. Yeah, I wonder if the dialogue that Hackman's saying was touched up by Tarantino or not, because, man, it's great dialogue. Like, especially them, like, screaming at each other. Just, like, it's just so good. Robert Towne and Steve Zalen also contributed key scenes. Towne wrote the von Clausewitz scene, having to do with the essential nature of war. Andy Garcia was one of the early choices for the role of Lieutenant Commander Hunter. Reportedly, Tony Scott used 4 cameos simultaneously for at least a few scenes. But yeah, I think that's about it though. But I've always really liked the movie. I think it's incredibly watchable and very intense. You know, both Denzel, all the acting, but Denzel and Gene Hackman, they're, you know, firing on all cylinders, and it's, you know, it's great to watch. And also, you know, great direction from Tony Scott. The movie's never boring. There's really not a minute that I think you should cut. So, but that's about it. Again, R.I.P. to Gene Hackman and his wife and his dog. I mean, they're still looking into what happened. I have my ideas, but yeah. But yeah, that's about it. See you next time.